welcome back. So you see the title of the video, you click, that's why you're here. Do Grail units get better treatment during their refines because they're Grail units? And I know that may seem really outlandish just to claim, or even say, mainly because they're some of the more easily accessible units that we get in the game, on top of the fact that there isn't any sort of stated precedent for it. However, after looking through the refines that we've been getting, at least through the course of this year, as well as a bit from last year, I've had this theory going on for a while, which I didn't really talk about on the channel for I don't know what reason, but I always had it at the back of my mind that Grail units are more than likely going to get better treatment during refines because they cost Grails. What do I mean by that? I'll go into that in a second, but basically my theory is that because they are locked behind a currency, making these refines a lot higher quality will more than likely let players pull for these Grail units, building them up, so on and so forth, thus increasing the overall value of heroic Grails. And that's what I really want to discuss today because I do think it's interesting overall, and I do want to know just everyone else's general thoughts on it, mainly because I don't think I'm the only one who's maybe noticed this, but at the same time, I don't think there's anyone who's really been as vocal with it. So we may as well just talk about Grail refines, how they started, how they are now, and what it means really for the future of Grail unit, and whether or not it's really this intentional. So with that being said, we may as well just get started. Early day refines, I think everyone is pretty much in agreement that for the most part, Gen 1 units and even early Gen 2 units really didn't get refines that still hold up even to this day. You have some exceptions, obviously, but I think that more so comes from the fact that there are some of the last units to get refines in their respective generation. So units from Gen 1 that maybe got a 2020 refine, or even potentially a really early refine that was still okay. Maybe like Sonya, for example, who has her Quick Impulse 2 Wudao tone, which is still pretty good, all things considered. But for the most part, most refines that came out during the Generation 1 and 2 era really don't see the time of day nowadays, because not only is power creep just rampant like crazy, but also they just don't compete nowadays because their effects aren't nearly as coveted as they once were, or even were never to be. And the same thing could have also been said for early day Grail refines, which we didn't automatically start with Grail refines. It did take a while before we started getting those, but the ones we did get early on, like Tobin, Narshian, Barkut, didn't really get that good of a refine, or they got a refine that doesn't really help them out specifically. So in the case of like Barkut, he got a decent weapon. It's still pretty good even to this day. However, it's more so held back to his archetype of being an enemy haste cav, so it doesn't really shine as it should. But even then, we still had the occasional really decent refine like Marissa with her Slaying Wudao that also has Times Pulse and attack speed boost. We had Voltaire, who has his Slaying Fury Lance, which can be really, really good for setting up Wings of Mercy beacons. You also had Legion, who had his Unconditional Heavy Blade effect, which was also really nice for getting specials out. And then you also had Navarre that had his Slaying Quicken Pulse gimmick, like akin to the likes of Sonya, but it was a bit more coveted at the time because he could instant Gale Force when it wasn't as easy to pull off. But generally, most Grail refines weren't of really high quality, especially back then. And it only really started around Finn's refine, where generally the quality of Grail refines have been going up and up, or they've remained consistently decent at minimum. And I say at minimum because even maybe some underwhelming ones that people may not have liked per se are still relatively decent in their own right. But ever since Finn, we had the likes of Malkana, who got a decent refine, although it was a bit rehashed from other refines. It's still Spectrum 8 with healing, which was so good. Julius, who is very good, although he also suffers from the likes of Deadeye effects, lethality, which is pretty much everywhere. But even then, it was still pretty good and still holds up really well. We had Linus, who got his Fang Basilicus, which is also really good. Canas, Walhart, Jump, I could keep going. My point is that ever since Finn, refines for Grail units have just been going up and up and up. And I think there's a good reason for that. For argument's sake, let's just assume that every player had at least 3 copies prior to their refine. So for a Grand Hero Battle unit, you had the 3 copies you could get, and if you waited long enough, maybe you got like a 4th or 5th copy, depending on how it works. I think it's 4 copies if you wait all that time. And for Tempest Trial, you get the 2 copies and then the occasional Ephemera unit. But that didn't really start until a while back, so some older units that were Tempest Trial locked didn't get that treatment. So let's just say 2 Tempest Trial and then 3 Grand Hero Battle. At minimum, if you were to want to max out these units that cost Grails, you would need easily between 8 to 9 copies, or if you just never had one to begin with, 11 copies total, which can get really, really expensive as with every increasing interval with Grails, it goes up by 50 Grails and caps at 500. And because of this, I believe Intelligent Systems kind of caught on with the idea that if they were to give these units better refines than normal pool units, not necessarily like the best refines always in their batch, but like at least at the upper echelon of the batch, then more people will end up building them, which means that they'll need to go get Grails. And the only place you can really get Grails consistently is Aether Raids. And let's just assume, for again simplicity's sake, that people bounce between Vaults of Heaven and then tiers 21 through 29 or whatever the case is. Assuming you were to do that and you were consistently playing it, on top of whatever login stuff you get, you're probably getting about maybe a few hundred Grails a month, average, give or take. Some higher, some lower, depending on how frequent they stay in Vault of Heaven and whether or not they consistently play Aether Raids. Even that being the case, a few hundred a month isn't really going to take you far, especially if you want to max merge them. That can easily be 2,000 plus Grails in one go. And since we get Grail refines pretty much almost every month now, the amount of Grail projects that people would want to build is only ever increasing. Now, it is also possible to get Grails from the Celestial Stone shop and Forging Bonds, but I'll cover the Celestial Stone shop thing in a second. My point being is that I believe Intelligent Systems wants to still sell Aether Raids, which makes sense. They're still releasing Mythics, Legendaries. Well, Legendaries are more applicable to the likes of Summoner Duels, Arena, yada 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 yada, but they still have applications in Aether Raids. But even with that being the case, and even though they did slow down on the amount of Mythics they're releasing each year, as now we're getting back-to-back legendaries nowadays, I still think that to Intelligent Systems, if they were to make Grail refines a whole lot better, then they can instill the idea into players that, hey, if you play this mode and you get more Grails, then you can build these really good units that are easily accessible, and you don't really have to roll as much unless you want specific skills. Now granted, you still would pull for like new skills, units regardless, really for whatever you want, but I think there is that incentive of, well, if I could get this unit that's really good and easily mergeable and easily accessible, then I don't have to really invest as much time summoning, and I can save orbs for whatever else, which is really nice. Of course, it doesn't really take the whole flower investment into a consideration because most of these units that are getting refines are really, really old. Like, they can get 20 to 25 flowers depending on their movement type, and that's a lot. That costs a lot of flowers. I think nowadays for 25, you need 2,660, which is a lot of flowers to invest into. But I think to a similar extent, they're also applying it to the freebie units that we get nowadays. I should preface this by saying a lot of the Grail units, more often than not, they don't really have a dedicated PRF to call their own, which means there's less incentive to build them on paper. However, considering they are modern, they have modern BST, they take less flower investment, they're going to perform a lot better right out of the gate. However, comparatively to units that get refines later on, such as, I guess a good example would be Rutger versus Yenfei. And even though they both have PRFs to call their own, Rutger just got his refine and arguably is going to perform a lot better than the likes of Yenfei because he has a lot more effects with the trade-off of just having to run distant counter in his A slot. Well, even with that being the case, Yenfei still takes less investment overall to get going. He has distant counter built into his weapon with damage reduction, so that's really, really good as is, but considering the fact that he also scores 185 BST, only takes 10 flowers maximum nowadays, as opposed to Rutger, who takes, I believe, 20 or 25. I believe it's 20, but that's still a lot. There's incentives for both sides as a result, because you can always build Yenfei, he's ready to go right out of the gate, but with more proper investment, time management, yada yada yada, your Rutger will more than likely outperform Yenfei in most scenarios. And that's kind of the other prospect with modern day Grail units. Even the ones that don't have PRFs to call their own, they still have modernized BST, meaning that investing into them comparatively to the likes of older units is going to take less overall. And even though they'll probably perform greater in the short term because they're easier to invest into, you just use them right out of the gate for the most part, in the long term, the older Grail units are probably going to be outperforming unless they have like a really, really bad PRF. But I think this is the system they're trying to go with nowadays. So even refines that seem pretty average, even by today's standards, is still going to hold up a lot better than probably a lot of other refines that we're probably getting in the normal pool. And I believe this is also part and due to the fact that they do cost additional currency to build. And even though you can just save up Grails, it's going to take a really, really long time to accumulate all of these, which is why a lot of people also tend to either wait for ephemera codes to come around so they get another copy, or a Grand Hero Party revival. Whatever the case may be, people tend to wait it out just so they can save on Grails. And I don't see them increasing the amount of Grails we get over time, mainly because I think they know that if they could get people to play Aether Raids to accumulate more Grails, then more likely than not, they're going to be pulling on Mythic banners or Legendary banners so they can get the new Mythics, or they can help improve their defenses, score better so they can earn more Grails, more rewards, so that in turn can help them get Grail units that they want to invest into. Because also keep in mind that Aether Raids also provides a good amount of flour, so that could also be put towards investing into your older Grail unit. But that's just my perspective overall. I think there is an argument to be made as to whether or not Grail units will more than likely get a better refine than a 3-star, 4-star contemporary, or even some 5 stars, because there are some cases where that tends to be the case. But I would also bank on the idea that if you're a 5-star seasonal or 5-star locked unit, your refund is definitely going to be of high quality at bare minimum. In most cases, at least. There's always some exceptions that really shouldn't be like that, but even with that being the case, I do think that they do want to sell you on Aether Raids still, even if they're trying to push Summoner Duels more and more and more. They still have their bottom line, which is why I do think there is an argument to be made. But that's enough of me rambling. You have to let me know what you think down below. Do you think this argument has any sort of foundation? Am I just being crazy? Because honestly, I could be losing my mind. Are there any old Grail units that you still like to invest into or are hoping to get refined sooner or later? I believe Har is getting his refund either next month or the month after, and I'm hopeful that his refunds can be really good, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's it for the video. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.